Tonight, the father of a 7-year-old boy and his girlfriend are now facing felonies in connection to the boy's death. Right now, both are sitting in the Marion County Jail with a $100,000 bond. Our Chase Howell has the new allegations tonight and also talked with the Marion County prosecutor to see if they could end up facing a murder charge.
It's been nearly 2 weeks since 7-year-old Kayden Gavarrete was found dead inside his Southside home. The boy's father, Kayden Gavarrete, and his girlfriend, Julia Sizemore, are accused of beating, starving, and locking him away in a bedroom. And according to court documents, in May 2024, Kayden weighed about 48 pounds. But by the time of his death, he weighed a mere 32 pounds.
What is alleged is unspeakable, and it hits you not as a prosecutor, but it hits you as a dad. I have a 7-year-old.
Ryan Mears is the Marion County prosecutor. He says the charges the two are facing now are nowhere near set in stone.
December 22nd, 2024. Police were dispatched to a modest home on the 1300 block of South Pershing Avenue in Indianapolis. What was expected to be a routine welfare call came just 3 days before Christmas, at a time when most children were buzzing with excitement for gifts and family gatherings. When officers knocked on the door, no one answered. Nearly 2 long minutes passed before it finally opened. That pause, heavy and uneasy, set the tone for what they were about to encounter. Inside was a silence that felt unnatural. In one of the back rooms, officers entered a space stripped of comfort and warmth. On the floor of a nearly empty bedroom lay 7-year-old Kayden Gavarrete, unresponsive. The discovery was as haunting as it was heartbreaking. Neighbors later admitted they didn't even realize a child lived in the home. Imagine that. An energetic young boy who once lit up every room with his smile had, in a matter of months, vanished from everyday life. How could a child disappear in plain sight? This case was not only about what happened in those final hours. It was also about the months of warnings that went ignored, the people who looked the other way, and a system that was meant to protect him, but stayed silent until it was far too late. As we begin this documentary, we'll confront difficult questions. How many signs can be missed before a child's future is lost? And how do families, communities, and institutions allow silence to become the loudest sound of all? Please brace yourself. Some parts of this case will be deeply unsettling. Before we continue, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, we cover true cases that raise awareness and honor the victims who should never be forgotten. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps build a stronger community. And to our loyal subscribers, your shares, likes, and comments ensure these stories reach more people. And together, we're making a difference. Kayden Gavarrete was born in October of 2017 in Indianapolis. From the very beginning, those who knew him described a boy with a spark that drew people in. He was bright, curious, and full of energy. He loved superheroes, video games, and had the kind of smile that could lift the mood of anyone in the room. Family members say he had an empathetic nature, always ready to comfort others, even at such a young age. But his early years were not without difficulty. His mother, Tammy Mason, struggled with personal battles that deeply affected the household. In May of 2022, when Kayden was just 5 years old, Tammy died from a drug-related cause. The loss was devastating for the family. It was also the moment that changed the course of Kayden's life forever. With his mother gone, the courts placed Kayden in the sole custody of his father, 26-year-old Kevin R. Gavarrete. On paper, this decision might have seemed straightforward. Children are often placed with surviving parents after such tragedies. But to those close to Kayden, it was the first of several decisions that raised concerns. Kayden's maternal relatives, particularly his aunt Jessica Ryan, quickly voiced their worries. She not only expressed concern about Kevin's ability to care for the boy, but even tried to pursue custody herself. She believed Kayden would be safer and better cared for in her home. Yet, despite her efforts, she was unsuccessful. The courts decided there was not enough evidence to justify removing Kayden from his father's custody. What makes this more troubling is that Child Protective Services had already been involved with the family even before Tammy's passing. There were documented visits to the home, evidence that state agencies were aware of instability. Yet in the aftermath of Tammy's death, those interventions did not prevent Kayden from being placed under Kevin's care. From that point forward, Kayden's connection to his mother's side of the family began to erode. Relatives recall how quickly contact became restricted. Invitations and requests to see him were often denied, and opportunities to spend time with him disappeared. His once wide circle of love and support was narrowed to only those inside his father's home. Friends and relatives would later say that his once radiant presence seemed to fade after Tammy's death. The little boy who had been full of energy and joy was slowly being pulled out of the lives of those who cared most for him. It was a dimming light that few could fully grasp at the time, and no one realized how completely he would vanish from daily life. After the loss of his mother, Kayden's world changed even more when his father, Kayden Gavarrete, began a new relationship. He moved quickly into a partnership with 20-year-old Julia M. Sizemore, a decision that would have a lasting impact on the household. The couple lived together as if trying to build a new family of their own. They soon had 2 young daughters, and by late 2024, Julia was expecting a 3rd child. From the outside, this looked like the start of a growing family, but beneath the surface, the relationship was described as unstable. Neighbors who lived nearby later recalled that Kevin and Julia mostly kept to themselves. Their interactions with the community were limited, and when they were seen, it was typically during errands or short outings. It was during this period that Anne, Kevin's mother, also lived in the home. Her presence could have offered stability, but she died suddenly after what was described as a fall. Family members were uneasy about the circumstances, and suspicion lingered, though no official action was taken. Her death only deepened concerns among relatives who already worried about the environment Kayden was living in. When neighbors did see Kevin and Julia in public at places like Kroger or Walmart, they were usually with their 2 daughters. What stood out most was who wasn't there. Kayden was rarely, if ever, seen. In fact, several neighbors later admitted they didn't even know a 7-year-old boy lived in that house at all. For a time, Julia's brother and his girlfriend also lived under the same roof. They had opportunities to see the way Kayden was treated, yet when they eventually moved out just weeks before his death, they never reported what they had witnessed. Their silence became another missed chance for intervention. According to the Coalition for Responsible Home Education, which later cited the probable cause affidavit, Kayden was listed as being homeschooled during the 2024-25 year. But investigators found little evidence that genuine education was taking place. Instead, reports painted a picture of a child increasingly shut off from the outside world, without the safety net of teachers or classmates who might have raised concerns. Family members also noticed disturbing changes. Kayden appeared frightened of both Kevin and Julia. Accounts described him being left alone, isolated, and in some instances denied the basic care every child deserves. But even these troubling signs of neglect could not prepare investigators for what they would discover in those final days. In the weeks leading up to December 22nd, those who had glimpses of Kayden noticed troubling changes. Relatives later recalled how he no longer looked like the lively child they once knew. He appeared frail, and on more than one occasion he was said to have asked for food. To those closest to him, his decline was visible, yet his situation remained hidden from public view. When questioned after the fact, Kayden Gavarrete told investigators that his son had been sick for weeks. He described Kayden as refusing to eat and admitted that the boy had lost significant weight. Despite this, he chose not to take him to a doctor. Kevin admitted he feared what medical professionals might say if they saw his son's condition, and so he avoided medical care entirely. Julia Sizemore gave a different explanation. She told authorities that Kayden didn't appear sick to her, but instead had what she described as behavioral issues. She claimed he was hyperactive, resistant, and difficult to manage, implying that his problems were more about his attitude than his health. Neither account aligned with what investigators would later find. Instead of seeking help, Kevin and Julia provided a series of implausible explanations. Kevin suggested that Kayden may have drunk household chemicals, though he admitted he never saw it happen. Julia claimed that the marks investigators questioned might have been the result of tantrums, that Kayden had harmed himself by throwing fits. These statements minimized the severity of his condition and failed to explain his visible decline. Relatives added another troubling piece to the puzzle. In a conversation, Julia allegedly told them that the boy had said he wanted to see his mother, who had passed away in 2022. She went on to claim that after this incident, Kayden was unable to walk. Rather than taking immediate action, Julia shared this with family members casually. Investigators later recorded this account in the affidavit as part of the disturbing timeline of Kayden's final days. By this point, all the warning signs were present. Kayden was weak, hungry, and visibly unwell. Yet the adults responsible for his care did nothing to change course. Their words downplayed the seriousness of what was happening, and their silence toward authorities ensured that the situation remained hidden until it was too late. If this story already feels important, take a second to subscribe, because what investigators uncovered next shows how many warning signs were ignored and why this tragedy was preventable. On the afternoon of December 22nd, 2024, at around 3:30 p.m., Indianapolis Metropolitan Police were dispatched to the 1300 block of South Pershing Avenue. The call came from Kayden Gavarrete, who reported that his 7-year-old son needed help. When officers arrived, they approached the front door of the modest home. They knocked, but no one answered. Nearly 2 minutes passed before Kevin finally opened the door. That delay, later noted in reports, immediately raised concern for investigators. Once inside, officers were led to a small bedroom at the back of the house. The space was sparsely furnished, containing little more than a futon frame, a small couch, and a sleeping bag spread on the floor. There they found Kayden Gavarrete unresponsive. Paramedics were called, but he was pronounced deceased at the scene. Detectives quickly noted that Kayden's condition did not align with the explanations offered by those inside the home. His body appeared extremely thin, far below what would have been expected for a 7-year-old child. His face and arms showed visible bruising and marks that were inconsistent with normal play or accidental injury. Investigators also saw patches of broken skin and scabbing in different stages of healing, suggesting the injuries had occurred over time. The room itself told a story as well. There were no toys, no school supplies, no signs of a typical child's daily life. To detectives, Kayden's physical state and the sparse environment around him suggested not a sudden medical emergency, but a long pattern of neglect from the adults in the home. Investigators immediately began questioning both adults about what had taken place in the hours before the call. Kevin's account was troubling. He admitted he had been awake most of the previous night, playing video games into the early morning hours. He then slept late into the afternoon and did not check on his son until much later in the day. When asked why he had not noticed earlier, Kevin stated that Kayden often stayed in his room and did not come out on his own. His explanation painted a picture of detachment, not urgent concern. As the investigation unfolded, detectives turned to the probable cause affidavit, which documented what was immediately clear to them at the scene. Kayden showed unmistakable signs of severe malnourishment, and his body carried injuries consistent with repeated trauma over time. These were not the results of a sudden illness or accident. They indicated a prolonged period of neglect and harm. When asked to explain further, Kayden Gavarrete also insisted the marks on his son's body were self-inflicted. He told investigators that Kayden had thrown tantrums in recent weeks, at times throwing himself to the ground. Other marks, he said, could have come from sleeping too close to a floor vent in his bedroom. Detectives found these explanations implausible. The injuries varied in type and age, and they did not match the accounts Kevin was giving. Julia Sizemore's statements also raised suspicion. Initially, she claimed she had not seen Kayden for a full week before the incident. But under questioning, she changed her story. She later admitted she had been in the home on December 21st, the day before police were called. That shift in her account cast doubt on her credibility and left investigators wondering what she had seen and why she had chosen not to intervene. While an official autopsy had not yet been finalized by the end of December, prosecutors made it clear that more serious charges could follow. They openly acknowledged that while neglect charges had already been filed, murder charges were not off the table once full medical results were returned. This underscored how grave the evidence appeared to those leading the case. The findings not only contradicted Kevin's and Julia's explanations, but also raised a critical question. Why had no outside intervention happened sooner? Kayden's condition had been deteriorating for weeks, if not longer, and yet there had been no doctor's visit, no hospital call, and no emergency alert until it was far too late. The stark difference between the caregiver's words and the forensic evidence pointed to a devastating reality. This was not simply a case of missed meals or momentary lapses. It was a long and sustained pattern that had gone unchecked. But this wasn't the first time authorities had crossed paths with Kevin and Julia, and their past would cast a long shadow over the investigation.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We do begin with new information on the tragic death of 7-year-old Kayden Gavarrete in Indianapolis. The investigation is revealing new details. 2 people are now facing neglect charges after his brutal death. That does include that boy's father, Kayden Gavarrete, and his ex-girlfriend, Julia Sizemore. News 8's Raina Revel is here with new information tonight. Raina.
As police continue to gather evidence and information surrounding this heartbreaking case, new court documents have surfaced, unveiling disturbing insights into Kayden Gavarrete's final days. According to the probable cause affidavit, the 7-year-old child, Kayden Gavarrete, was found unresponsive in a home near the southwest side of Indianapolis on December 22nd. Medics pronounced him dead at the scene, with his body showing severe signs of trauma, malnourishment, and other evidence, including bruises, burns, and scars. The coroner on scene found Kayden Gavarrete's body had rigor mortis in jaw and head only. His body also showed multiple cuts, scabs, bruises on face and head, bruises on lower stomach, legs, and feet. He was found in his bluey sleeping bag he had gone to sleep in that night. Court documents also show that Julia had left Kevin and was found at an extended stay hotel near the airport. Kayden was reportedly homeschooled after being pulled from school due to bullying. His father, Kayden Gavarrete, stated that the boy had been unwell for about a month and showing signs of acting out following the death of his biological mother. The father also states that Kayden may have also been drinking contents from bottles with chemicals in the kitchen. The parents claim that Kayden had not been seen by a doctor in over a year and weighed just 45 pounds. A longtime neighbor who lives down the street says he often helps other residents, but found the interactions with the arrested couple to be off when he offered to assist with lawn care.
It's so shocking right now, and it's so close to home. If you don't want your kids, take them to somebody, call somebody. There's somebody that'll take them.
On January 2nd, 2025, just days after Kayden's death, Kayden Gavarrete and Julia Sizemore were brought before a Marion County judge for their first court appearance. The hearing was brief but significant. Prosecutors formally filed charges of neglect of a dependent resulting in death, along with several additional counts of neglect connected to the children still in the couple's care. The courtroom atmosphere was tense, as family members of Kayden sat only a few feet away from the defendants. The state argued that the weight of the evidence demanded serious charges, pointing to the affidavit that outlined Kayden's condition and the contradictions in Kevin's and Julia's accounts. But despite the severity of the allegations, the judge followed Indiana's standard bond procedures. Bail was set at $100,000 each, with the option of release if they could pay just 10% of that amount, $10,000 apiece. The decision sparked immediate frustration among Kayden's extended family. Outside the courthouse, relatives expressed outrage that the two could potentially walk free so soon after being accused in connection with a child's death. To them, the bond amount was an insult, a figure that seemed far too low given the gravity of what had happened. Many feared it would allow Kevin and Julia to return to the community without facing swift accountability. For prosecutors, the charges were only the beginning. They emphasized that the autopsy and further forensic testing could lead to additional counts, and that murder charges had not been ruled out. Still, the immediate focus remained on ensuring that the neglect charges would stand and that the case would proceed to trial. As the weeks moved forward, hearings were scheduled, motions were filed, and the legal process began its slow march. Yet for Kayden's family, there was no sense of resolution. Each appearance was another reminder of the gap between the suffering they knew he endured and the cautious, procedural pace of the court system. By August 2025, no trial date had been finalized and no sentencing had taken place. The case remains ongoing, a stark reminder that justice for Kayden is still incomplete. For many, the courtroom proceedings underscored not only the failures that led to his death, but also the struggles families face when seeking accountability through a system that often moves too slowly. On January 2, 2025, the same day Kevin and Julia appeared in court, Kayden's family gathered for a private funeral service. It was a small ceremony, away from cameras and headlines, where relatives grieved a boy they had fought to protect, but ultimately could not save. For those who attended, it was not only a farewell, but a moment of reckoning. An acknowledgement that a life so young had been cut short by failures that extended far beyond the walls of one home. In the days that followed, a makeshift memorial began to grow outside the residence on South Pershing Avenue. Neighbors and strangers alike left flowers, candles, and stuffed animals. It became a symbol of sorrow, but also of community solidarity, as people who had not even known Kayden came forward to honor his memory. The sight of those tributes was a reminder of how deeply his story resonated, and how many felt the weight of what had been lost. For Kayden's family, grief quickly turned into action. Led by his maternal relatives, they began advocating for a state-level reform they called Kayden's Law. The proposal sought to reshape how child custody cases are handled in Indiana, ensuring that children's safety is placed above parental preference when there are warning signs of violence or neglect. A central part of the proposal called for specialized training for judges and court staff on issues of domestic violence and child endangerment, training that many believe could have altered Kayden's fate. It is important to distinguish this effort from the federal Kayden's Law, which was included in the Violence Against Women Act of 2022. The circumstances that led to the creation of the federal Kayden's Law are covered in detail in our documentary on the Kayden Mancuso case. You'll find a link in the description if you'd like to learn more about how that law came into effect. The federal version encouraged states to adopt stronger protections in custody cases nationwide, but implementation has varied widely from state to state. What Kayden's family is pushing for in Indiana is a localized version of those reforms, one that directly responds to the gaps exposed in his case and holds the state accountable for protecting its most vulnerable children. Kayden's story underscores how systemic shortcomings can combine to devastating effect. Child Protective Services had been involved before, family members had raised alarms, and police had documented troubling incidents. Yet the decisions made by courts and agencies left him in an environment that proved fatal. His death is not only a family tragedy, but a stark example of what happens when warning signs are dismissed or minimized. The legacy his relatives hope to build is one of change, a determination that his life, though brief, will serve as a catalyst for reforms that could save others. The candles at his memorial eventually faded, but his name continues to carry weight in conversations about accountability, child safety, and the urgent need for systemic reform. Kayden's case stands as a haunting example of both personal betrayal and systemic failure. It is a reminder that neglect and harm are not always visible to the outside world, and that tragedy can unfold even in homes that appear ordinary from the street. The lesson here is clear. Danger is not always marked by obvious signs. Abuse and neglect often remain hidden until it is too late. That is why vigilance, education, and strong community awareness are essential. Families, schools, and neighbors must recognize that silence enables tragedy. When concerns go unspoken or warnings are brushed aside, vulnerable children are left without the protection they desperately need. The responsibility does not rest solely on relatives or bystanders. Systems created to protect children must follow through with urgency and accountability. Child Protective Services must act decisively when red flags appear. Family courts need mandatory training on domestic violence and child endangerment to ensure that custody decisions place safety above convenience or parental preference. These reforms are not optional. They are essential to preventing more children from being failed in the same way Kayden was. Kayden's short life now carries a legacy that should drive change. His name is being used by his family as a call to reform laws, strengthen oversight, and ensure that no child's cries for help are ignored again. Kayden's life must not be forgotten. By subscribing, sharing, and commenting, you help push for reforms that protect vulnerable children and hold institutions accountable. Every share spreads awareness, every comment builds pressure, and every subscription ensures these stories are not lost to silence.